Good afternoon, certainly, and thank you so much for being here today for this critically important meeting when you're looking at addressing some of the needs from a regional perspective. And of course, this meeting is about devising a comprehensive plan, a long-term plan to reduce the human casualties, certainly life and property, certainly economic disruptions, and certainly any type of disaster assistance costs related or associated with disasters or natural disasters. So of course, in lieu of the many natural disasters that have befallen our country in the course of a last year, costing billions of dollars and affecting millions of lives, certainly we need to come up with a regional perspective or strategize with some type of regional perspective to address our collaborative needs here in our community. So with this, thank you so much for being part of this and directing this in a sense, because certainly our communities, the cities of La Grulla, Escobares, Roma, certainly Rio Grande City, and of course the county, Starr County, coming with some type of plan, some type of vision here to address these needs before they occur. And as we see some of these pictures, we are well aware of what a natural disaster can do and how we can mitigate some of those relief efforts to get back to normalcy. So again, with that, thank you so much for being here today, and we certainly look forward to your input. I know we're going to be doing a survey, and this is just the first steps of beginning this process to come up with a strategy, a regional strategy that can really help us out and also direct some of the funding that's available to our community or communities like ours. So again, thank you so much for being here today. Welcome, and look forward to your input. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Can everybody hear me there, or would you like me to use the mic? We're good. Okay. So, my name is Lupita Trinidad. I am with the South Texas Development Council. As you know, that's the Council of Governments. We're a regional planning commission who takes care or handles the planning with Webb County, Zapata, Jim Hogg, and Starr. So, thank you, Mayor, for you touched on the points that we're going to be discussing right now. And what we're here today is to discuss the Starr County Multi-Jurisdiction Hazard Mitigation Plan. I think the first question a lot of people have when they hear this would be, what is mitigation? So as defined by FEMA, hazard mitigation is the effort to reduce loss of life and property by lessening the impact of disasters. It is most effective when implemented under a comprehensive long-term mitigation plan. So mitigation is strategies, actions that will help reduce the loss of life and property by lessening the impact of natural disasters. As we know, natural disasters are unpredictable, they're unstoppable, and well, they're disastrous. If you all recall, like the mayor just mentioned, we had a series of natural events happening just last year. One of them in particular, Hurricane Harvey, hit the coast of Texas. By estimates of Governor Abbott, the damages were on the numbers at about $180 billion. So as you can imagine, we are in serious trouble when you have numbers that high. Now, when you think about disasters, we always are quick to jump to how are we going to recover from that? How do we come back from a natural disaster? And many times we don't stop to think that there's ways before the event that we can reduce that loss or even eliminate that loss. If there's something we can do before this natural disaster attacks us or hits us and affects us, what can we do so it doesn't hurt us like it has before? So with that in mind, and like the mayor said, we are devising, the South Texas Development Council, along with Starr County and the multiple jurisdictions he mentioned, we are developing a hazard mitigation plan. Now, why is a mitigation plan important? One, It assesses the risks and vulnerabilities to hazards your community is susceptible to. So we're narrowing it down. Right now, we're not concerned of all the hazards. We are looking at the United States or at Texas. We're looking at our community. What affects our community? What is our community vulnerable to? It contains strategies and actions to implement mitigation. Not all strategies are universal. Doesn't mean like if we have a project that we want to do here, it may not apply to northern Texas because of, Texas is a huge state. So we do have a lot of variance. A mitigation plan also educates and brings awareness around threats, hazards, and vulnerabilities. Again, we're identifying what our community is at risk or vulnerable to, and what assets we have at risk. What community assets are at risk if we were to be hit with something like Harvey in the southern part of Texas, or flooding, hurricanes, windstorms, whatever affects your community. What are ways we can reduce those damages and those losses? Most importantly, and something again the mayor touched on, was a FEMA approved plan is a condition to receive certain types of non-disaster emergency assistance. What does that mean? Non-emergency, there's not a disaster declaration going on yet because there is nothing affecting us. However, funds do become available, federal funds do become available for projects for communities who want to implement projects that would reduce that loss, because for FEMA, it's easier to give you a project or give you money to make something stronger and have it being less damaged than when a disaster strikes and then you have to recover and pay those damages and rebuild. And then if you build it the same way you did the first time, guess what? If we get hit again with the same thing, it's gonna, you're gonna have to rebuild again. And that's what FEMA is trying to reduce. The amount of time that you have to recover, the amount of money you need to recover every single time something like this happens. Because again, natural disasters are unpredictable and unstoppable. So it's more than likely it's going to happen. We don't know when, we don't know how big, we don't know how strong, but we do know it can and it will happen. So FEMA does provide funding for communities to implement these actions that they have for their community to make that community more resilient and stronger. However, FEMA's one condition: you need to have a hazard mitigation plan. And this is where we're at right now. So, what kind of hazards are we talking about? Hello? No, that was way too far. Okay, so let's go. How can you participate? Providing input. There is a quick survey at the end of this mini presentation, so don't leave. You can provide input by telling us what hazards you think affect your community. Not what we're telling you, but what you think would affect your community, because this is what we're going to use in the hazard mitigation plan. We want to know, sometimes 2 minds work better than 1, and 20 work even better than 1. And sometimes we don't think about potential hazards or potential assets that might be at risk, and you might think they are, and that sparks an idea. And it's like, that is something we should have included in the plan. But we don't want to say we should have. Let's say we should include in the plan. We don't want to make, we don't want to make that mistake knowing we have the opportunity that we can do this right the first time. So also, like I said, telling us what community assets are at risk. There's also another way you can participate. You can mitigate at home, which leads me to the following slide. There we go. A difference I do want to mention, we hear a lot of preparedness and mitigation, and I want to stress out the differences between preparedness and mitigation. Preparedness, how can you prepare? Have an emergency supply kit. When you need to evacuate or when you need to shelter in place, you want to make sure you have those necessary items that you might need if they keep you in your household for 2 or 3 days. That includes medication, food, water, necessary items that you will need in case you have to take off from your home or shelter in place for a few days. Create an emergency plan for your family and pets. Many of us don't think that we need a plan. But at the end of the day, what happens when a natural disaster strikes you? Everybody's calling 911, everybody's using their cell phones. You get a congestion in your system, in your communication towers. You get a congestion, you can't get a signal. You can't call your mom, you can't call your mother-in-law, you can't call your neighbor, because why? All the lines are congested. But if you had a plan that you had already told your family, in case something happens, this is where we're gonna go. or this is where you need to go, this is how long, are the emergency numbers, these are the shelters, you need to have that communication with your family. And also, let's not forget to include our pets. You know, they are part of the family, and it is important to include that within your plan to see, for example, what happens if we have an evacuation notice? Are we just gonna leave and forget about our little pet and have him drown? It's pretty sad, actually. So have a little emergency kit for him too, with enough water, with some food that you know you can just grab, pack, and go. Be informed. So be informed, know your evacuation routes, know your shelters, know information that your fire department, law enforcement departments provide to you, so you know where to go, know how to evacuate, and create less of a chaos when trying to evacuate or need to shelter in place. And get involved. As a community, there are many groups or programs that you can participate in and learn more about how you can work within your community and help your fellow neighbors in case of an emergency does strike. So these are just examples of preparedness. How can you prepare for the disaster? Now, here are some examples of how you can mitigate, reduce the impact, and reduce the loss of life and property. You build houses to code. Your cities have building codes. We don't follow those there's a reason those building codes are there. Okay? So if we build our houses up to code, our electrical codes are up to date, you have less of a chance of having an electrical fire and having not only your house burned down, but the neighbor's house and then the other neighbor's house. And now you're gonna have some enemies when you rebuild your house, because your neighbors are gonna have to rebuild theirs as well, and they're not gonna be very happy with you. So you're mitigating not only the disaster to your house, but towards your neighbors. What's another way you can mitigate? You can cut grass and shrubbery around your home. South Texas is very popular for its dry and extreme heat, well, our extreme heat. This, especially on the summers, grass tends to dry up, which makes it easier to spark any wildfires. So making sure your grass and your shrubbery is cut and it's low, you reduce that potential for that wildfire to expand. Another way you can mitigate is elevate your water heater and your electrical panel in your home if you live in a high flood risk area. Many times we don't think that these things would affect us, but when we come back from a flood and you have an electric panel underwater, guess what? You're gonna have to purchase a new one. Hopefully the breaker shut it off and you don't have any something that could result in an electrical fire. But these are things you can mitigate in your home. So this is the difference between preparedness and mitigation. When you're preparing for a disaster. And when you're mitigating, you're trying to reduce the loss that this disaster is going to do to your property and to your life. Any questions so far? Great. So what are some of the hazards we're talking about? Texas is a big state. We know I think it's the second or third, geographically speaking, size-wise, in the country. These are some of the hazards that have been stated have been recognized by the state in 2010 as the disasters that affect the state of Texas. We are not limited to these. However, these are the ones that the state recognized as being of hazard to the entire state. However, more particularly, if you see the southern side, this is the one we're concerned about. Our area, where Starr County is. There said there was a pointer. I don't know how to use it. So sometimes, even though, now that you see these up here, just because you see them up here, they don't necessarily mean you're susceptible to them. Again, Texas is a big state. There's a lot of range. There's a lot of geographic area. Not everything is going to pertain to your community. However, in this session right now, in this meeting, I want you to concentrate not on the entire state of Texas, but your community. Starr County, Rio Grande City. This is where, this is what affects you. Your home, your community, your community assets, your shelters, your roads, your infrastructure, those important critical facilities and assets. This is what concerns you. So this is where we want you to concentrate. Now let's define a little bit about what these hazards are. Floods. We know what floods are. Thank you to the city of Rio Grande. They provided these posters in the back. This is from 2010, and if I'm not mistaken, the last flood that was around here. So you can see the kinds of damage and the kind of extent that a flood can do. Tornadoes. So We all know what tornadoes are. We see them usually in the northern part of the state, hitting more of the Oklahoma and middle, northern, central part of Texas. We know again the damage they can do, and the winds that can reach up to 300 miles per hour, and the damage that they have caused in the past. Hurricanes. We just mentioned Harvey as being one of the, and it's actually one of the worst in history in matters of damage that it has caused. It is up there. It is up there with Katrina, I believe. So, as you may know, hurricane season runs through June 1st through November 30th for the Atlantic region. Thunderstorms and lightning. So all thunderstorms are dangerous and produce lightning. In the United States, an average of 300 people are injured and 80 people are killed each year by lightning. This is where you determine, we know what lightning is, we know what thunderstorms are. We want to see if this is something that would concern you within your area. Wildfires, I know this is very popular around southern Texas, especially with our dry weather and our heat. We have a lot of, shrubbery, and we have a lot of land with wild grass around the ranch area. So that's where it could start. But again, if we try to mitigate that, we can reduce how much the damage that these wildfires can cause. Drought. One thing I want to say about drought is that a drought is a period of unusually constant dry weather that persists long enough to cause deficiencies in water supply. Many times we think, we're in southern Texas, it doesn't rain that much, we're going through drought. It is very defined into what a drought is. Not because it doesn't rain in a few months are we thinking that it's a drought, especially when rain is not that frequent in this part of the state. But it is, the way it is defined, it is a period of unusually constant dry weather that persists long enough to cause deficiencies in water. If we're seeing those deficiencies in our water supply, then it's a concern, then it's a hazard. Coastal erosion. This we might not hear so often. Why? Because we're not in a coastal area. But we want to define it anyway because this is a hazard that is particular to Texas. Coastal erosion is the wearing away of land, such as loss of riverbank, beach, shoreline, or dune material. It is measured as the rate of change in the position or displacement of riverbank or shoreline over the period of time. So it's that wearing away of land that's close to the coast. Dam levee failure. So as you may know, I think Falcon Dam is one of the closest ones, and it does affect you. What happens when a dam fails? What happens when one of those levees breaks? Well, water goes downstream, we have flooding. So you have two hazards in one. Earthquakes. So we know earthquakes are a sudden rapid shaking of the earth. Causes a lot of damage, a lot of loss of life. We heard of the event in Mexico happening last year. A lot of loss of life, a lot of loss of property. Expansive soils. So expansive soils is something we don't hear as often, especially sometimes in our area. But the way it's defined, it's soils and soft rock that tend to swell or shrink due to the changes in moisture content. So think about if you have your structure built over expansive soils, if there is not enough moisture in the air, the soil is going to expand, therefore making your foundation a little shaky, potentially damaging your building. Or it could also shrink depending on the humidity and depending on the location of and the location where you are. Extreme heat. So this is something I also want to touch base on because of the fact that we are in South Texas. The way it is defined, it is extreme heat is typically recognized as the condition where temperatures constantly stay 10 degrees or more above a region's average high temperature for an extended period of time. So, we think South Texas, it's hot, it's really hot. That is common to southern Texas. Now, if we're talking about having a constant temperature of 122 degrees, for quite some weeks, potentially, we're talking about a natural disaster. 120, 122 is not natural to our region. We're usually in the 110s, 112s. But when we see that increase in degrees and we see that being here for quite some time, we're talking about a natural hazard. Hailstorm. So We all know hailstorm, a little spherical balls of ice that can cause damage, can break windows, can dent cars, can affect many, can do quite some damage depending on the size of it, but usually they cause some damage depending again on the severity of it and how intense it is. Land subsidence. So land subsidence is a little different from expansive soils. Land subsidence is a loss of surface elevation due to the removal of subsurface support. These range from broad regional lowering of the land surface to localized collapse. So as opposed to expansive soils that you can have them expand or shrink, these sink. Land subsidence, you tend to have those little sinkhole types that where the ground lowers, and again you can have damages to roads, infrastructure, or any type of buildings that you have within that area. Severe winter storms. So heavy snowfall and extreme cold can immobilize an entire region. Even areas that normally experience mild winters can be hit with a major snowstorm or extreme cold. We have areas where we usually get snow in Texas, but when you're talking about 15 to 20 feet, then we're talking about something severe and intense. Windstorms. Wind can tear the roofs from buildings, rip siding from exterior walls, and throw debris through windows. Fall trees can crush roofs and walls. High winds can happen anywhere and strike during many types of storms. I know last year the area of Webb County had one of these, and it did cost I think over $1 million in damages because of those high winds. Many people assumed it was a tornado. There was no funnel, however. So it was determined it was a windstorm, which did cause about $1 million, close to $1 million in damages. If there are any questions, feel free to let me know, or any comments. We have several members of the participating planning team in here. We have various jurisdictions developing this plan, which includes the County of Star, Rio Grande City, City of Roma, City of Escobares, and Roma ISD is also part of this. With that said, I'll pass it back to you, Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And just to touch up again, thank you so much for participating. I know it's going to be the initial process of this in getting public hearings and so on, and I know there's been several entities engaged in this, but I cannot stress that enough about the importance of planning and again in preparation for what could potentially occur, and especially some of the infrastructure and facilities and everything that's important as per the survey. Thank you all for being here. Judge, thank you as well for being here, and certainly all the representatives from the different municipalities here in Stark County. And again, I cannot say this enough about how important it is for the entire community, the entire region, the county, and all the municipalities to bring about this endeavor, because it's going to be beneficial for the entire community, particularly as we're able to mitigate some of these issues and potentially bring some funding along with this in the process, because I know some of the resources that we have or the monies might not be adequate to be able to protect some of these, I guess, entities or structures. However, if we do move on securing some of that funding, it will be beneficial to the entire community, the entire county as well. So again, thank you so much. Thank you for participating and having the input.